They told you not to look at the boy, not because he was dangerous, not because he was diseased, but because to see him was to question everything you thought you knew about human nature. The year was 1839, the place a quiet town in Ohio. The story should have died with the boy's burial, sealed in a coffin, lowered into the earth, forgotten by time. But it didn't, because there was something about him, something the doctors would not study, something the priests would not bless, and something the townspeople whispered about in cellars and candlelit corners. His body was wrong. His presence was wrong. And the worst part, his death was not the end, but the beginning of a mystery that still stains American soil. Imagine it. The local physicians gathered in a dimly lit chamber, the smell of iron and smoke thick in the air. They had seen fevers, deformities, madness, but this was different. This boy's body did not decay as it should. His eyes refused to cloud, his skin refused to sink. For days he lay there, suspended between life and death, and the town waited for answers. Yet no one dared to cut, no one dared to probe, because the more they looked, the more they realized he was not merely sick, he was outside the order of nature. And so the record was buried. The family silenced. The official story scrubbed from the archives. What survives are fragments. Whispers carried through diaries, private letters, forgotten county notes. And when you put them together, the picture they paint is not of a child at all, but of something else wearing the shell of a child, something born into a nation still trembling with revivals, secret societies, and occult experiments. You were never supposed to hear this story. That's why it was erased, dissolved into the soil of Ohio, where corn now grows over bones no one dares to name. But once you hear it, once you let it enter your mind, it can but be undone. Because this boy is not just a figure from history. He is a mirror, a warning, a piece of the machinery behind the curtain. And tonight, I'm going to pull that curtain back. The first reports came from the undertaker. He was a man hardened by death, used to the pale weight of bodies, used to the silence of those he prepared for burial. But when he touched the boy's skin, he withdrew his hand in shock. It was warm, not the warmth of fever, not the chill of sickness lingering, but the warmth of something alive. The undertaker left the room without finishing his task. Later, he confessed that he heard the faintest murmur escape the boy's throat, too soft to be words, too broken to be breath, a sound that should not have come from a corpse. When the doctors returned, they refused to record what they saw. Their journals stopped mid-page. One physician's daughter found her father sitting by the hearth, staring into the fire, his notebook half burned in the flames. When she asked what frightened him so deeply, he whispered, "It was not a boy." Those words were the last he ever spoke of it. He lived another 12 years, but never returned to medicine. The church, too, wanted silence. The local minister declared that curiosity was a form of sin. He warned the town that looking too long at this thing was to invite madness, possession, or worse. His sermons grew darker. People described him as hollow-eyed, as if preaching against the boy consumed something inside him. One night, after thundering against unnatural births, he collapsed in the pulpit, dead before he hit the ground. His congregation fled into the streets, whispering that the boy had taken him. But here's where the story sharpens into something more dangerous. Ohio in 1839 was not an isolated farmstead world. It was the furnace of new ideas, revivals, secret fraternities, and hidden lodges sprouting in every town. Men gathered in back rooms under candlelight, drawing symbols in chalk, swearing oaths in the dark. Knowledge was being summoned, reshaped, weaponized, and in those circles the boy was whispered about. Some said he was an experiment that had gone wrong. Others said he was a vessel that someone somewhere had tried to channel something through him. The truth, it may be both. And once you understand what that means, you'll realize why the boy was erased. What kind of child forces physicians to abandon their craft, ministers to drop dead mid-sermon, and families to bury their own name in silence? To understand the boy of 1839, you have to peel back the skin of American history, back to the shadows where medicine, faith, and secret power collided. The doctors who first examined him weren't country bumpkins. Many of them were trained in the new sciences emerging in Europe: anatomy, phrenology, mesmerism. They were men obsessed with charting the human body like a machine. Yet when faced with this boy, they turned away. Not because they lacked tools, but because their tools revealed too much. His skull, they wrote in private notes, was disproportionate in ways inconsistent with life. His spine curved unnaturally, yet not from disease. His chest cavity seemed to expand beyond normal range, as though built to house something more. And then, the detail that chilled every hand that touched him. His blood. It did not clot. It did not dry. It shimmered black-red for days, as though defying the laws of decay. The townspeople saw what the professionals wouldn't put into words. Mothers pulled their children away when they passed the boy's home. Farmers salted their doorsteps. Dogs would not go near his window. Even the bells of the local church tower rang off tempo the week of his death, as if the sound itself was disturbed by his presence. And here lies the real fracture in the story. Someone wanted this forgotten, because for every fragment we can trace, there are pages torn, ledgers missing, and records scrubbed clean. The county's burial registry for that month contains every name but his. The official church book has ink spilled across the page where his family entry should be. You don't erase like that unless there's pressure from above. Remember, this was an America just decades after the founding, an experiment in freedom, yes, but also in control. Lodges of Freemasons spread across Ohio, Rosicrucian whispers drifted through towns, and revivalist preachers were using frenzy as a tool to bind minds. And within that furnace, a boy who should not exist appeared. He was not just a medical anomaly, he was evidence of something intruding into this world, something institutions could not allow to be remembered. The doctors didn't refuse him out of ignorance, they refused because they understood, and understanding was the real danger. Ask yourself, why would men of science, hungry for discovery, turn their backs on the most extraordinary specimen they had ever encountered? Curiosity is the fuel of progress, but in 1839 that fire was deliberately extinguished. And the reason is simple: this boy did not belong to medicine or to the church or even to the family that birthed him. He belonged to something older, something that thrives in secrecy and feeds on fear. The whispers that survive tell us the boy's father was not a simple Ohio farmer. He was said to have been a man entangled in lodges, societies that promised light but dealt in shadows. The Freemasons had deep roots in the state, their halls scattered across counties like watchtowers. Men who wore aprons in the lodge room often wore robes in church pews and carried gavels in the courts. Power was woven through hidden oaths, and in those oaths, bloodlines mattered. Blood was the thread that bound them. So when this boy was born twisted, half human, half something else, his father did not see a curse. He saw a key. Some records hint that the chill, Dees was taken to lodge gatherings as an infant, displayed not as a son but as a sign. They believed he was proof that the veil between the natural and the supernatural had been pierced. A vessel, unfinished, unstable but potentially usable. What was meant to be channeled through him remains unclear, but the intent is obvious. Control. To build a human not just of flesh and spirit but of influence. A body that could be programmed, perhaps even inhabited. This was the age of mesmerism, of trance experiments, of attempts to bend will through invisible currents. Wealthy men sought mediums, not out of superstition, but out of hunger to command minds. If the boy truly resisted decay, if his body pulsed with something beyond nature, then he represented the holy grail of power, a vessel immune to time, ready to house the will of another. But the experiment failed, or perhaps it succeeded too well. Instead of serving as a conduit, the boy became a beacon. Animals fled him, men broke under his gaze, and the town itself began to unravel. What was meant to be a weapon of control turned into a fracture in the local order. Too visible, too uncontainable. And so the boy was erased. His name struck out, his memory dissolved, his bloodline forced into silence. But shadows always leave stains, and those stains tell us the experiment did not end in 1839. It only changed hands. Think carefully. When a town buries a story, it is not silence, it is obedience. And obedience has architects. The boy of 1839 was not the first anomaly erased from American memory, and he would not be the last. Across the Midwest, strange births, unmarked graves, and vanishing records ripple like echoes of a hidden experiment. Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, each a frontier for settlers, yes, but also laboratories for power. You see, America's 19th century was not just railroads and expansion. Beneath the farmland and factories, another nation was being built, a nation of hidden societies, psychological trials, and human manipulation. If you know where to look, you'll find the same pattern. Repeating, an event too strange to explain, a community disturbed, authorities refusing to speak, and then erasure. The boy's disappearance was not unique, it was policy. Letters from physicians of that era, private letters never meant for publication, speak of children born under strange lights. Reports of infants who did not breathe for hours yet lived. Notes of bodies that resisted decay. Cases where mothers swore their babies spoke in full sentences before their first year. Each account ends the same way, professional silence. The official records vanish, but the personal testimonies survive like cracks in a sealed wall. And ask yourself, why Ohio? Why there? Because in the 1830s, Ohio was the beating heart of revivals, mass gatherings where men and women fell into trances, convulsed, and claimed to hear voices from beyond. Thousands flocked to these camp meetings where the line between religion and hysteria blurred into something else. What better cover for experiments in control than a crowd already primed for ecstasy and submission? Now connect the dots. A boy whose body refused decay, a town silenced, lodges whispering of vessels, doctors destroying their own notes, ministers collapsing mid-sermon. This is not chaos, this is orchestration, a hidden structure using fear and silence to test how much truth a community could bear before it cracked. And here's the truth you were never meant to see. The boy's erasure was not an act of mercy, it was a template, a model for how institutions would bury forbidden anomalies, turning living questions into forgotten dirt. And from that template, darker systems were born, systems that still operate today with more precision, more reach, and more power than those old Ohio lodges could have ever dreamed. The boy was the beginning. The question is, what did he begin for? The boy of 1839 was not just a horror frozen in time, he was a signal, a test, a prototype. Because what they learned from that Ohio town was simple. Truth does not need to be destroyed. It only needs to be buried beneath silence, fear, and distraction. Once you see that, you recognize the pattern everywhere. Think of it. The doctors who burned their notes, the minister who preached until death, the family who vanished into obscurity. Each was controlled not by chains but by pressure, by the fear of isolation, by the weight of knowing something they could never speak. That same mechanism became the skeleton of institutional power in America. Silence the witnesses, rewrite the story, and let time do the rest. The boy was erased, not with fire, not with violence, but with the quiet chokehold of obedience. Fast forward, and the machinery only grows sharper. Schools feed narratives approved by committees. Media circulates the same phrases until independent thought drowns. Universities push consensus, not inquiry. And if someone strays, they're ridiculed, blacklisted, erased, just like the boy. Because if a community can be trained to forget what stands before their very eyes, then a nation can be trained to forget its deepest truths. But here's the darker angle. The boy was not just about forgetting, he was about testing limits. How much could people witness before they broke? How far could fear push them before obedience became instinct? That experiment never ended, it only scaled upward. Consider how governments use events to measure public reaction, what shocks we absorb, what lies we swallow, what inconsistencies we ignore because acknowledging them would shatter our constructed sense of order. Every forgotten scandal, every unexplained phenomenon, every historical gap, they are fingerprints of the same process born in that Ohio town. You were trained to think control looks like armies and weapons. No. The truest control looks like erasure. It looks like a child who never officially existed. It looks like a town that forgets overnight, and it looks like you, living in a world where pieces of reality vanish and you are told to keep walking. The boy's body may be gone, but the system that erased him, it is alive. It is the very air you breathe. Control is never just about chains or prisons. It's about the mind. Your mind, trained so carefully that you don't even realize you've been trained. The boy of 1839 was the seed of this understanding. The silence that surrounded him was not accidental. It was psychological architecture. The townspeople didn't just forget, they were conditioned to forget. Look at how it works. First, fear. When something impossible appears, like a body that refuses decay, the first instinct is terror. That fear isolates you. You don't speak, because to speak risks ridicule, exile, or worse. Second, authority. When the doctor refuses to examine, when the minister warns against curiosity, their silence teaches you how to think. You look to leaders for permission, and when they deny it, your own eyes betray you. Third, erasure. Records vanish, pages are blacked out, names are struck. Without written proof, your memory feels fragile, like maybe you imagined it. You doubt yourself. That is the heart of psychological control, turning your own mind against you. These three steps, fear, authority, erasure, became the invisible chains of entire nations. They were tested on a small Ohio town, perfected through decades of revivalist frenzy and secret lodges, and scaled into the institutions that govern your life today. Governments don't need to hide every truth. They just need to shape your reaction to it. Give you a spectacle to fear. Place trusted voices to define it, then erase the parts that don't fit, and you will erase yourself. You will silence your own questions before they leave your lips. Think about your own life. How many times have you noticed something strange? Numbers that don't add up, events that contradict, truth whispered but never confirmed, and then quietly, you let it die in your mind. You bury it under routine. That is not weakness, that is programming, the same programming first tested when the boy's corpse refused to rot and the community was taught to look away. But here is the deeper cut. Once you recognize the pattern, you are no longer asleep inside it. And that is dangerous, for you and for the system itself. Because the greatest fear of those who erased the boy is not that he will return, it's that you will. The boy was not the end. He was the beginning of a template, one that would be sharpened and weaponized across centuries. What Ohio whispered in 1839 became a silent doctrine. Control the perception, and you control the man. That doctrine soon found its battlefield. First, through religion. Revival meetings did more than save souls. They tested mass obedience. Thousands swayed, convulsed, spoke in tongues, not because heaven had descended, but because their minds had been primed to surrender. Authority set the tone, fear stoked the fire, and erasure sealed the memory. A crowd leaves convinced they touched God, yet forgets that they were also studied. How many bodies convulsed? How quickly did they cry? How deep would they fall before breaking? These revivals were not just worship, they were laboratories. Then came war. In every conflict, from the Civil War onward, the pattern repeats. First, the spectacle of fear, an enemy painted as monstrous. Second, authority, leaders' voices repeated until dissent feels like treason. Third, erasure, the photographs, letters, and testimonies that contradict the official story quietly vanish. Soldiers return with memories that don't align with the history books. They silence themselves because the cost of speaking is too high. Do you see it? Fear, authority, erasure, the cycle refined. And beneath it all, hidden experiments multiplied. You've heard whispers of them, Bodies in asylums, nameless graves, children in orphanages used as subjects. Always the same method: break the mind with fear, shape-eyed it with authority, and erase the evidence. From hypnosis trials to chemical testing, the roots trace back to that Ohio soil. A boy who would not decay, a town forced to obey, a system proven to work. Here's the cruel brilliance. The institutions don't hide everything. They leave fragments, just enough to taunt, just enough to destabilize the ones who see. They don't fear total exposure. They fear the man who notices the fragments, the man who refuses to look away. That man cannot be controlled. That man becomes dangerous. And maybe that's why you're here listening now, because whether you know it or not, you've seen the fragments too. You've felt the gaps, sensed the lies. The boy of 1839 was their first experiment. You are their latest. Up to this point, you could almost convince yourself the boy was a medical anomaly, a failed experiment, a footnote in a dark archive. But the deeper you dig, the less scientific the story becomes. The boy wasn't just unnatural, he was prepared. A vessel. And vessels are not accidents. They are built or summoned. You see, Ohio in the early 1800s was not just farmland. It was also a hotbed for occult societies that cloaked themselves in Christian language but practiced rituals imported from Europe's hidden lodges. Masonic halls stood within walking distance of revival tents, and behind closed doors symbols were drawn, candles burned, and oaths sworn not to God but to something else, something older, something that feeds on blood and secrecy. Now look again at the boy. His body resisted decay. His blood remained fresh, his skull disproportionate, his chest cavity enlarged. These are not random deformities. They are signs. Signs of a vessel crafted not to live but to contain. To hold what? That's the question the doctors refused to ask. The minister collapsed before answering. Some whispered it was a spirit, others said an intelligence. But one word returns again and again in scraps of testimony: possession. Imagine it. A body engineered or summoned to house something that could not otherwise walk this earth. A boy in appearance only, carrying within him a presence that bent animals, men, and even the town itself into unease. If true, then the refusal to study him was not ignorance, it was fear of contamination. To cut into him might have meant releasing something they could not control. Better to bury the shell and silence the memory than risk opening what lay inside. But here's where the air turns colder. Patterns of similar vessels appear in scattered reports across the century. Children born with black eyes, infants who spoke in languages no parent understood, corpses that resisted rot, always in isolated towns, always erased, always scrubbed from the record. Coincidence? Or a quiet campaign to test how thin the veil could be stretched before tearing? The boy was not a freak of nature, he was a ritual disguised as a birth. And if you believe rituals end when the body dies, you have not been paying attention. Rituals echo, rituals stain, rituals wait. And some rituals are still alive. Possession is not what you think. You've been taught to imagine it as a rare spectacle. Screaming voices, spinning heads, priests with crucifixes. But the truth is colder, quieter, and far more common. Possession is not only spiritual, it is psychological, it is institutional, and the boy of 1839 was the first American mirror of that truth. Think of his body, a child who resisted decay, a vessel that radiated unease. He did not act, yet those around him bent under his presence. Doctors abandoning science, ministers collapsing in terror, families silenced by shame. That is possession in its purest form. Not demons screaming, but invisible pressure that bends will and warps choice. It is not about one boy. It is about control moving through flesh. Now widen the lens. Entire societies can be possessed. A nation can convulse under fear, speak in the voice of its masters, and orget itself in ritual obedience. What better test of that power than a boy whose body was an empty stage for something else? If he was truly designed as a vessel, then he was not only an anomaly, he was a lesson, a proof of concept that the human body, the human mind, the human community could be hollowed out and filled with another will. This is why the doctors turned away, not because they didn't understand, but because they understood too much. To dissect him would mean confronting the possibility that all men are vessels waiting for something stronger to enter. That authority itself might not be human, but a force inhabiting flesh. And isn't that exactly how institutions behave today? The church preaching doctrines it no longer believes, governments marching in lockstep, their leaders repeating words that sound hollow, empty, lifeless, corporations moving with inhuman appetite, consuming without rest. Do you really believe these are men acting freely? Or are they vessels, like the boy, occupied by something older, something colder, something that moves from body to body, generation to generation? The boy was an omen, a foreshadowing, a message hidden in flesh. You can be hollowed, you can be filled, you can be erased, and yet remain standing, smiling, obedient. And most men today walk willingly into that fate. If the boy of 1839 was a vessel, then the world you inhabit today is the temple that sustains vessels. Flesh is only one container. Words are another. Symbols are another. Entire nations are hollowed out not by blades or chains, but by the repetition of rituals they no longer recognize as rituals. Look closer. Every flag raised, every anthem sung, every pledge recited, it feels harmless, patriotic, communal. But in truth, it is a liturgy, the rhythm, the repetition, the surrender of self into the crowd. These are the same mechanisms tested in revival tents and whispered in lodges. They do not merely express unity, they program it. The boy taught them that a vessel does not resist if you train it early. And so, the programming begins with children. Recite the pledge. Stand for the bell. Obey the teacher's command. The vessel is molded young, so that by adulthood he no longer feels the hollowing. He mistakes it for identity. And the symbols, they are everywhere. The all-seeing eye on the dollar bill, the obelisk in the Capitol, the inverted stars on medals. You were told they were decoration, coincidence, harmless history. They are not. They are sigils. Sigils are not fantasy. They are keys. Keys that bypass the rational mind and speak directly to the subconscious. When you salute a flag, when you bow your head to a seal, when you whisper words you didn't write, you activate the lock. You turn yourself into a vessel, voluntarily. This is the possession no one warns you about. Not a demon clawing at your throat, but a system that trains your tongue to speak its language, your body to enact its rituals, your mind to carry its symbols. You are not commanded, you are conditioned, and conditioning is far stronger than force. The boy did not need to speak. His presence bent reality because he embodied a ritual in flesh. Now the system no longer needs boys like him. It has you. It has millions reciting, saluting, kneeling, obeying. Flesh, mind, and culture hollowed out in unison, waiting for something older to move through them. The vessel of 1839 was buried, but the ritual survived, and now the entire nation is the vessel. Ritual alone is not enough. Symbols and chants can shape the vessel, but to bind it fully, you need trauma. Trauma cracks the mind, weakens the defenses, makes obedience feel like safety. The boy of 1839 was a trauma made flesh, a horror that broke the town's will, taught them to accept silence rather than face the truth. That lesson became the cornerstone of modern power. Shock the masses, then guide them into obedience. Look at history. Catastrophes, wars, assassinations. Each arrives with fear and confusion, each followed by a unified narrative delivered from on high. Always the same cycle: fear, authority, erasure. The fragments remain, but most men don't want fragments. They want order, even if the order is false. Trauma delivers obedience faster than logic ever could. The boy taught them that. And behind these patterns you always find the same hidden hands. Families whose names you are allowed to praise but not question. Lodges that meet in silence, their windows shuttered, their floors traced with chalked symbols, elite circles that move wealth, law and bloodlines as if they were pieces on a board. These men are not possessed by superstition, they are its engineers. They learned long ago that a traumatized population does not need chains, it needs only ritual and repetition. Give men bread, give them games, give them a flag to salute and an enemy to hate, and they will cage themselves. Every generation, the trauma escalates. One war is not enough. One crisis is not enough. They must be fed shock after shock until obedience becomes instinct, and in between, the erasures continue. Records vanish, truth-tellers die suddenly, archives burn, yet the pattern repeats, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the man willing to see it. Now, I must ask you something dangerous. If you are beginning to see the pattern, if your eyes are opening, you must anchor it. Comment this phrase twice below: I will not be the vessel. Not once, not casually, twice. Write it to carve it into your identity and to signal that you are no longer clay in their ritual. This act may feel small, but small acts of defiance are how men escape possession. The boy's silence became his erasure. Your voice becomes your survival. The boy of 1839 was not erased simply because he frightened a town. He was erased because he revealed something too dangerous. So identity itself can be engineered. What happened in Ohio was the seed of a blueprint, how to hollow out not just a person, but an entire people, and rebuild them as obedient vessels. Think about what identity is. It is memory, ritual, belief, belonging. If you fracture memory with trauma, you loosen the anchor. If you replace rituals with your own symbols and chants, you steer the rhythm. If you dictate belief through authority, you shape thought. And if you control belonging, who is praised, who is cast out, you hold the man himself. That is identity engineering. That is how populations are designed, not born. Look at the United States in the decades after the boy. Waves of trauma, war, famine, epidemics. Each shock cracked memory. Then came the rituals. Pledges in schools, parades in streets, banners unfurled in every town square. Identity was no longer local, no longer rooted in family or land. It was national, engineered from above, bound to symbols men never chose, and authority sealed the pact. Ministers, teachers, judges, doctors, all repeating the same narrative until dissent became unthinkable. Now the boy makes sense. He was the first visible vessel, a grotesque warning of what happens when a body is prepared for occupation. But his true legacy was invisible, the discovery that entire communities could be prepared the same way. A town conditioned to forget, a people conditioned to obey, a nation conditioned to kneel before trauma and rise in ritual. And here lies the cruelest trick. Once identity is engineered, men defend it as if it were their own. They fight for the very symbols that bind them. They silence themselves for fear of losing the belonging they never truly chose. They become their own jailers. The boy did not need guards. His silence infected everyone around him. In the same way, your silence is engineered to keep you in line. Identity is the final possession. Once they write it into you, you no longer resist. You protect the chains, and right now millions live in chains they mistake for freedom. The boy of 1839 was only a child, in flesh, but in truth, he was a prophecy, a hollow body, a fractured identity, a lineage cut off. And what was done to him in silence is now being done to men in the open. Identity engineering does not just build obedience, it destroys masculinity, will, and the continuity of blood itself. That is the true cost. A man's strength is not only in his muscles or his voice, it is in his clarity, his refusal to bow to lies, his ability to protect and to build. But when his identity is engineered, that strength is siphoned off before it can even rise. He becomes a shell, proud of borrowed symbols, defending rituals that were written by his handlers. His will bends not to his own blood, but to an institution that sees him as nothing more than a vessel, just like the boy. Notice the pattern. Generations of men trained to salute flags they did not design, bleed in wars they did not declare, work for corporations that drain them, and die in silence with their sons repeating the same ritual. This is not freedom, it is inheritance of possession. Each man thinks he is choosing, but his choices were carved into him since childhood. He is born into chains already gilded with slogans, chants, and trauma. And then comes the bloodline. Families fractured, lineages broken, fathers absent, sons raised by institutions instead of men. Do you see it? The boy of 1839 never carried his line forward. His blood was erased, cut off. That erasure was not a mistake. It was a model. Because if you can break the lineage, you break continuity. You sever memory. You weaken men at their root, so that every generation must start again, ignorant, easy to program. The greatest theft is not of money or land. It is of will. It is of blood. It is of the masculine fire that builds nations and defends them from predators. Once that fire is engineered out, men stand tall in body but hollow in soul, just like the bee. Boy, a vessel, a presence without purpose. And here is the truth. Unless you reclaim your identity, your will, your blood, you are already him. The boy of 1839 had no chance. His vesselhood was forced, his bloodline erased, his memory buried. But you, unlike him, still breathe, and that means there is still a choice. To remain a vessel or to tear free from the ritual. But make no mistake, breaking free is not comfortable. It is not safe. It is not easy. It is war against the invisible chains wrapped around your mind since birth. The first weapon is awareness. Most men never even see the cage. They kneel to flags, repeat pledges, obey commands, and think themselves free. Awareness shatters that illusion. To name the ritual is to weaken it. The boy terrified his town, not because he spoke, but because his body revealed the lie. That flesh can be hollow, that presence can be engineered. When you see the pattern in your own life, the fear, the authority, the erasure, you pierce the veil. And once pierced, it cannot be sealed again. The second weapon is refusal, not grand rebellion, not waving banners in the street. That only feeds the spectacle. Refusal is quiet, surgical. It is saying no when they demand yes. It is refusing to repeat words you did not write. It is withholding your body, your blood, your will from systems that see you only as a vessel. Every refusal is an act of reclamation. Every no strengthens the spine that identity engineering tried to break. The third weapon is rebuilding. Awareness and refusal create space. But into that space, you must forge your own identity. Not the one handed to you by institutions, not the slogans, not the chants, not the empty rituals. Your identity must be rooted in your blood, in your will, in the truth you carve for yourself. Build your own symbols, write your own rituals, anchor your lineage so that your sons inherit strength, not hollow obedience. This is how the cycle breaks. But here is the warning. Once you awaken, you will feel the pressure. The same pressure that silenced the doctors, broke the minister, erased the boy. Society itself will push against you. Friends, family, colleagues, they will sense your refusal and some will turn away. That is the cost of freedom. That is the fire you must endure. Awakening is not safe, but it is the only path that leaves you more than a vessel. If awareness, refusal, and rebuilding are the weapons, then symbols are the armor. The boy of 1839 was erased because he carried no symbols of his own. He was a body, a vessel, a mirror, and the world filled him with meaning he never chose. You, however, can reclaim your mind, your blood, your lineage through symbols that speak only to you. Symbols are not decoration. They are anchors, a word, a gesture, a mark, a phrase repeated in secret. These things bind your conscious mind to your subconscious will. When the system strikes, when society demands obedience, these symbols remind you, you are not theirs. You are whole. You are your own vessel. The boy never had that. That is why he could not survive. Start small. A phrase repeated in the morning, a gesture performed in solitude, a token that holds meaning only you understand. Every repetition strengthens you. It builds a rhythm the world cannot break. You do not need to announce it to anyone. The true power of symbols is invisible. The more secret, the more effective. It is quiet rebellion, but rebellion that endures. And then expand. Anchor your rituals in what matters to you, your strength, your lineage, your will. Do not adopt the ceremonies of the system that seeks to hollow you. Build your own rites, celebrate your own victories, honor your own truth. Let these rituals train your mind as the boy's ritual trained the town, but in reverse. Let them fill you, not empty you. Let them strengthen, not erase. Remember, the boy was a lesson in what happens when presence is left empty. A body, a mind, a bloodline unclaimed, consumed by external forces. You are different. You still breathe. You still choose. The symbols you adopt are not just tokens. They are weapons and shields, a declaration that you will not be erased. They are the foundation of identity built deliberately, consciously, and fiercely. And once anchored, you will begin to see the world differently. You will recognize the hidden rituals around you. You will feel the pressure of unseen hands, and you will no longer obey blindly. That is the first true step toward freedom. The boy of 1839 was never just a child. He was a mirror, a warning, a blueprint for the machinery that shapes men without their consent. His body, his erasure, his silence, all of it was meant to teach the world a lesson. Presence without ownership is weakness. Identity without agency is vulnerability. And yet, you are not him. You still have the chance to claim what he never could. To transcend vesselhood is to take the deepest, most dangerous step, full awareness of the system and full refusal to participate in it. It is to walk among the symbols, the rituals, the manipulations, and see them for what they are. Tools designed to hollow men, to erase lineage, to control thought. Most will never see. Most will kneel willingly. But you, if you have followed this far, have glimpsed the architecture behind obedience. You have felt the pressure. You have felt the erasure. And now you must rise. The boy's lesson was brutal. The body can be manipulated, the mind can be guided, and entire communities can bend under unseen hands. But the true danger lies not in the mechanics of control. It lies in failing to recognize your own capacity for freedom. Awareness alone is not enough. Refusal alone is not enough. Ritual alone is not enough. They must be combined, deliberately, consciously, anchored in your will and bloodline. Only then can you transform presence into power instead of leaving it hollow. Every ritual you adopt, every symbol you own, every truth that you remember and protect becomes armor. Every act of conscious refusal strengthens the lineage. Every moment you refuse to be a vessel restores a piece of your will. You are no longer clay in the hands of the unseen. You are an architect of your own presence. You are the force the boy never could be. And here is the final truth. The boy was not just a story. He was a test, a template, a prophecy. But prophecy only controls the willing. You now have the knowledge that was forbidden, the awareness they tried to erase, and the power to refuse. You carry forward what he never could, the chance to inhabit your body, your mind, your bloodline fully, to be more than a vessel, to be a man who sees and does not obey blindly. The boy was buried, but you are awake. Now you stand at the edge. The boy of 1839 is buried beneath Ohio soil, erased from every record, and yet his presence lingers, like a shadow across centuries, across institutions, across men trained to kneel. You have followed the trail, felt the pressure, traced the rituals, and glimpsed the machinery that hollowed entire generations. You have seen the mechanics of fear, authority, and erasure. And now you must decide, will you remain a vessel, Or will you inhabit your body, your blood, your mind fully? The truth is dangerous. Once known, it cannot be unknown. You cannot step back into ignorance because the chains are visible now. You cannot kneel without awareness because the ritual is exposed. And you cannot live without vigilance because the systems that built the boy's erasure still move today, still seek to hollow men, still aim to turn presence into obedience. They watch, they whisper, they wait, but they cannot touch the man who refuses. Awakening is violent, not with fire or sword, but with truth. It shakes the bones, burns through certainty, and leaves you standing on raw earth staring at the machinery behind the world. Every choice you make now is a statement. To reclaim your identity, to guard your lineage, to protect your bloodline from being a vessel. Every word you speak, every ritual you perform, every symbol you honor in secret is a hammer striking against the invisible chains. Remember this. The boy was a warning, yes, but also a mirror. The mirror shows what happens when presence is unclaimed, when identity is surrendered, when will is hollowed. He failed. His body became soil. His lineage vanished. His town bent to the pressure. But you, awake, aware, anchored, can succeed where he could not. You can stand as a vessel of will, not of obedience. You can carry blood unbroken, mind unbound, presence unconquered. And the world will notice, not immediately, not with applause, but in the quiet, in the subtle shifts, in the refusal to obey rituals not of your making. You will signal the first fracture in the machinery. The first man who refuses becomes a spark. The spark can spread, and the cycle begins to break. The boy is buried, but you are alive, awake, present, unyielding. And that is the truth they were never meant to hear.